Hey y'all, it's Wit and welcome to another Free to Flow Friday. So today's tip on how to live your most free and abundant life is to get comfortable with failing. So failing is something that I don't think most of us like talking about, but it is so important because it's a part of our daily lives, And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned about failing is that failing isn't really failing. Whenever you fail, so to speak, you're just learning a lesson. And it may not always feel like a good lesson to learn, but looking back in hindsight, it's so helpful to see how much you've grown. I think most of us don't like talking about failing because it feels like we're inadequate. And failing, whether it's mistakes or doing something that we thought was right in the moment, but it turns out it didn't turn out the way we expected, can be really disheartening and discouraging. For example, I recently was supposed to have an event, and due to some circumstances, we had to cancel, and I was so upset. I was so disappointed. Not just that it wasn't happening, but disappointed in myself, and I was pleading with God. I was like, God, I don't understand why you would lead me to do these things, and then it fails, and then it doesn't turn out the way that I wanted. But tonight, I just finished Bible study, and it was so crazy because we were reading through Ezekiel 37 verses 1 to 14, and the scripture about the valley of the dry bones. So I found it so interesting how when God was speaking, he said, prophesy to the bones, and then the bones came together, there was a sound, all of that stuff, but there was still no breath in the bones, right? There was still no life in the bones. But then God says, now prophesy to the breath. And then it's alive and there's breath. And then, so it got me thinking, what in our lives are we just speaking to rather speaking life over? And it got me thinking, why would God not just tell him from the beginning, prophesy to the breath? Why not just give all the parts at one time? Why would you just not have the bones come alive from the jump? I don't understand. And it was crazy because as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, wow, Ezekiel didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. He followed God's instructions exactly, so it got me thinking he didn't do anything wrong, but yet it still didn't have the outcome that he expected. So it still took another word from God, and I think that's something that we really need to pay attention to. Just because we heard a word from God doesn't mean that that's the last step. It doesn't mean that that's the only thing that there is. It doesn't mean that we fail if things don't work out the way that we thought. Sometimes it takes more than one try. Sometimes it takes an extra step. Sometimes God has more in store, and we have to be willing to just trust him fully with the first part, right? Because sometimes God just needs to see if we're going to be obedient enough to even follow the first step so that he can tell us what to do next. So Ezekiel didn't fail. He didn't fail. He just didn't get all of the message yet. He didn't get all of the instructions yet. He just didn't see the whole path yet. He didn't see all of God's reasoning and understanding yet. And that is why we have to just be obedient and understand that even when it feels like we're failing, even when it feels like we're not doing enough, even when it feels like we did exactly what God told us to do and it's like everything's in shambles, or it doesn't have the new life or the newness that we expected, that doesn't mean that we're not exactly where we're supposed to be, doing exactly what we're supposed to do. So for me personally, I feel like as an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, a human being, somebody's future wife, I think that we all need to get more comfortable with failing, with being imperfect, so to speak, with not having things always go exactly according to our plan. Because if we truly believe that his ways are higher than our ways and that we're supposed to lean not only on our understanding but on his, then we have to be willing to fail and for things to just not make sense all the time and to feel like things aren't going the way we expected, but to keep pressing on anyway, to keep doing it anyway, to keep working in our anointing, keep working in our gifting, keep following the instructions that were given to us and doing it willingly, not reluctantly, not angrily, not, with a little bit of shade and some petty sprinkled in there. No, doing it willingly with our full hearts and with our full passion and our whole soul poured into it. And I think that the more comfortable we get with failing, the more comfortable we'll be with succeeding, because we'll start understanding that it's a process, that it's almost like a whole cycle of failure, misstep, mistake, success, failure, misstep, mistake, success, that whole cycle of things. But those those things that we once thought were failures, we can see how they were still working for our good because they taught us something, because we learned something. We learned how to trust. We learned how to do things differently. We learned who to work with, who not to work with. We learned ways that we could improve in the areas that we still needed to grow in. So I want to challenge you today. The next time that you feel like you failed, or you feel like a failure, you feel like everything is going wrong, take a step back first before you let yourself sit in those feelings, and ask yourself and ask God, what am I missing? What is the lesson here? What could I have learned here? What is the purpose of this? Help me understand. Help me trust. Help my unbelief. I believe in you, God, but something doesn't feel right. I feel like I did something wrong, and help me understand if I did do something wrong. Help me to move forward if I was in the wrong. Because again, we're all human. We're gonna make actual mistakes, and we're gonna take a few steps backwards sometimes. But even our steps backwards aren't really failure, because we're still not the same person we once were when we move backwards, right? We've already been further, so we know what ahead looks like. We know what being in the right alignment feels like. So we can always find our way back to that. So I hope this day forward that you start to see your failures not as failures, but as lessons, as blessings even. That may not always feel the way, but these failures can actually be a blessing in the long run. And I've been thanking God a lot more often for all my failures, all of my mistakes, all the things that didn't go according to my plan, but according to his plan, or even my mistakes that he turned around and used for his good. Because even when I'm not at my best, even when I'm messing up, even when I'm being that person I thought I would never be again, God is still there, and God still says, okay, you have a willing heart, so let me find a way to use you. We're still going to make it work out for your good and for my good. And lastly, you don't have to feel hopeless. I know it can be super discouraging and upsetting and really frustrating when it feels like you're failing. It's just very uncomfortable. And honestly, you just feel really unhappy. But you don't have to feel hopeless. And the last part of Ezekiel, around verses 12 to 14, made me so happy because, God was just speaking about how the bones represent Israel and how they were once dead, and, but he pulled them out of their graves and he breathed new life into them. And, it just reminded me about our promise, and the promise of everlasting life, and the promises of us having life and abundant life, and that we don't have to be hopeless when we have God on our side. We don't have to feel hopeless when it feels like everything has failed, because God is still with us. And we are still alive. So that means there's still redemption. There's still time to do better. There's still time for God to still have his way and, make all of the ways, because God is still a way maker. So if this video helped you at all, please like, share, comment, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And just let me know how you feel about it, and let me know if you have any other topics. Get comfortable with failure. Peace.